Okay, so in this video, let us look at the nose, the pharynx, and the larynx. So recall that these structures are the ones which make up the upper respiratory tract. So the nose has two parts. It is an outer nasal vestibule and an inner nasal cavity. So the epithelium which lines the nasal vestibule is divided into two. First of all, the part of the nasal vestibule which is continuous with the external environment is lined with the skin of the nose, and this skin is a stratified squamous keratinized epithelium, and within this skin we also find sweat glands and sebaceous glands, and we also find specialized hairs which we call the vibrissae. These are moist hairs which trap dust and particulate matter within the inhaled air. Okay, so the other part of the nasal vestibule is lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Okay. So for the nasal cavity, it is the internal part of the nose, and this is lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium, except for the superior concha, which you find at the roof of the nasal cavity. So the concha are bony projections from the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. So these bony projections are what we could refer to as the concha. And the superior one is lined with what we call the olfactory mucosa. So this mucosa is a specialized epithelium for sensing smell or odor. Okay, the medial concha and the inferior concha and the rest of the nasal cavity are lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Okay, so as air enters through the nose via the nasal vestibule into the nasal cavity, alright, so it reaches this superior concha, alright, and within the superior concha, we said there is, and at the superior concha, we said there is a specialized olfactory mucosa with an olfactory epithelium, which we talked about earlier. So it senses the smell of the air entering through the nose, right? This air, remember, it gets filtered by the vibrissae at the region of the nasal vestibule, okay, at this region, and within the nasal cavity, this air, it gets moistened by the mucus produced by the mucosal glands, and it also gets warmed by the fine capillary network located within the lamina propria of the nasal mucosa. Okay, so this capillary network has blood vessels. Okay, so say these are the blood vessels. They have blood which flow in the direction which is opposite to the direction of the flow of air. So air is flowing in this direction and blood is flowing in the opposite direction. This is such that the air, it gets warmed by the blood as it passes through. Okay, so this air passes from the nasal cavity, it passes into the nasopharynx. The paranasal sinuses, these are bilateral cavities which are located in the maxillary, the frontal, the sphenoid, and the ethmoid bones. So these are what you term the paranasal sinuses. In this picture, only two are visible, but there are more than that. But however, in this picture, only two are visible. Okay, so these paranasal sinuses, they are lined by respiratory epithelium, which is a bit thinner and it has a fewer goblet cells. And within the lamina propria of this thin respiratory epithelium, we find small glands. All right. So these paranasal sinuses, they are connected to the nasal cavity via small channels. So it is through these small channels that mucus produced in the mucosa of the paranasal sinuses passes into the nasal cavity, okay, such that the paranasal sinuses won't get clogged. Right? So these paranasal sinuses can get inflamed in what we call sinusitis. Now let's talk about the pharynx. The pharynx is made up of the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. So the nasopharynx is the part which is continuous with the nasal cavity. Right, so this is our nasopharynx. So this is our nasopharynx. Okay, and then we have the oropharynx, which is the part continuous with the oral cavity. This is our oropharynx. And then the third part is the laryngopharynx, and this laryngopharynx is somewhat a combination of the nasopharynx and the oropharynx, and it is the part which we will later divide to give us the trachea and the esophagus. This part. Okay. So the epithelium which lines the nasopharynx is simply respiratory epithelium, and within the mucosa of the nasopharynx we find the orifices of the two auditory tubes or the two eustachian tubes, such that these tubes will be lined by the same epithelium which lines the nasopharynx. So the eustachian tubes are lined by a respiratory epithelium. The oropharynx, since it is continuous with the oral cavity, it is lined with a stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. Okay. Then the laryngopharynx, since it is a conduit of both food and air from the nasopharynx and the oropharynx to the trachea and esophagus, it is lined by a protective stratified squamous non-keratinizing epithelium, so as to withstand the abrasive nature of the food as it passes down. Now let us look at the larynx. So the larynx, this is the passageway of air between the pharynx and the trachea. So specifically, this is our larynx. Yeah, all right. So because just inferior to this part, the trachea begins. Okay. So the larynx, it is formed by irregularly shaped plates of both hyaline and elastic cartilages. Okay, so we have the thyroid cartilages, the cricoid cartilages, the arytenoid cartilages, and more other cartilages forming this. So at the superior rim of the larynx, we have a structure which is formed by the elastic cartilage there, and this structure we call it the epiglottis. Okay, so the epiglottis, its function is to prevent food from passing from the laryngopharynx into the trachea, such that during swallowing, this epiglottis will sort of like close. All right, it will close the larynx such that the food will pass through the esophagus. Okay. Now, this epiglottis, it is lined by two types of epithelium. On its lingual surface, which is this surface closer to the oral pharynx, it is lined by a stratified squamous non-keratinizing epithelium. Okay. And on its laryngeal surface, which is this surface closer to the larynx, it is lined by a respiratory epithelium. Okay. So within the lamina propria of this epiglottis, we find mixed serous and mucus glands, which produce the mucus which lubricates the mucosa of the epiglottis. Now let us look at the vestibular folds. So just inferior to the epiglottis, we have structures which we find on the larynx. And these structures include the vestibular folds, the ventricle, and the vocal folds. So the folds are simply projections of the mucosa into the lumen of the larynx. All right. So we have the ventricular fold. All right. This one, and we also have the vocal folds. All right. And these two folds are separated between them by what we refer to as the ventricle. All right. So for this reason, these are also called ventricular folds. The vestibular folds or ventricular folds are immovable. They do not move, and they are lined by a respiratory epithelium. Okay, so beneath the epithelium we find mucosal glands within the lamina propria, and we also find mucosa associated lymphatic tissue in the mucosa of the ventricular folds. Okay, this part here we term it the vestibule of the larynx. Okay, this is the ventricle of the larynx. Okay, and then this part is usually termed the rima glottidis. Now let us look at the vocal folds. So remember we said the ventricular folds, they are immovable, so they are sometimes called fake vocal cords. Then these vocal folds, they are movable. All right, so they are the ones which are responsible for phonation and the production of sound. Okay, so these vocal folds, they are lined by a stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium so that they can withstand the pressure of the air as it passes through. So remember, during phonation, air is to pass upwards. All right, so the vocal folds, they have to withstand this air pressure. That's why they have stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. Okay, so these vocal folds, they have a dense regular connective tissue which supports their free edges. So this is their free edges here, and it is supported by what you call the vocal ligament. Okay, and beneath the mucosa we find a muscle, skeletal muscle there, which we call the vocalis muscle. So it is a contraction of this muscle which can either narrow the space between these two vocal folds or widen it, aiding in the production of sound or phonation. Okay, so this is the end of our video on the upper respiratory tract. See you in the next one.